And hello to all of you out there in podcast world. This is the Front Row Movie Reviews. I'm your host, Brandon Davis, and we're the podcast for people who actually like movies and TV. And we are here with our new episode of Zone-i-Sodes, our complete journey through the entire 5 seasons of The Twilight Zone, episode by episode. And we are finally into season 2 here. We're on episode 4 of season 2, actually. And we are on A Thing About Machines, which aired October 28th, 1960 on CBS. And I have here with me...
I am Scott, and Brandon, we've hit a milestone. Well, I think anything with an even number with a 0, I guess, is a milestone at this point. But we are on episode 40 of The Twilight Zone. Now, I guess if you count our intro episodes, 41, but let's just call it episode 40.
Well, and then we did our season 1 recap, so 42, actually.
Well, and then we have the special episode with the interview of Robert Meyer Burnett, so 42 or 43. See what happens when you play that game?
Yeah, that's true. But we've actually sat down and talked about 40 of these things. So
don't sound so enthused.
No. I'm very enthused. I haven't watched too far ahead, but I've watched a couple episodes ahead of this one that we're talking about today, and I'm actually pretty excited. We're talking about some pretty good ones here coming up in the next few weeks. So we're on an upswing.
I'm okay with that because we were on a little bit of a not maybe a downswing, but we were spinning our wheels for a bit there.
Oh no, it's interesting. Season 4 kind of starts a little. I don't want to say maybe underwhelming is the word because season 1 we had so many great episodes, and season 2 has such a great reputation that when you start it you're so excited. But King 9, Man in the Bottle, and Nervous Man are all you can't really call any of the three of them bad episodes, but they're just not top tier, and so maybe that's why it's just seemed a little underwhelming. But the redemption is coming.
And the Shat's coming, but that's for a few more weeks away.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And we do have an interesting one to talk about this week. I don't know if we call this one top tier either, but certainly
let's find out, shall we?
Certainly one that we haven't seen before. We are talking about A Thing About Machines, as I mentioned before. And Scott, let's get started with the plot synopsis.
I would love to.
All right.
So, Bartlett Finchley is a man with a stick so far up his behind that he talks like this. Not only does he talk like this, but he hates machinery, mainly because the machinery hates him right back. We start out the episode. I can't do that anymore. We start out the episode finding out that the TV repairman is fixing his TV for the second time. The first time, it would appear that Finchley kicked in the screen, and the second time, it would appear that Finchley ripped out all the cabling in the back of the TV to shut it up. I'm not entirely sure why Finchley calls the repairman if he's trying to get the TV to stop talking to him, but whatever. Finchley not only has problems with the TV, but he has problems with clocks, with radios, with telephones, with typewriters, and as we will soon find out, with a car. But before then, he also has a problem with his secretary, who abruptly quits, even though he begs her to stay. And after hearing this guy talk to her, I wouldn't have stayed either. After trying to silence all of his machinery from talking to him and telling him to get out, he hears sirens as he sees that his car has rode down the driveway and almost hit a small boy. He decides to run from the car, and the car decides to chase after him. And soon the car chases him into a pool in a neighbor's house. And we cut to a scene later where we find out that Finchley not only drowned, but he stayed at the bottom of that pool even after death. And the car is just going to hang around, I guess. The end.
And here's what Rod has to say. And in this intro, we see Rod inside of a television. And he says, "This is Mr. Bartlett Finchley, age 48, a practicing sophisticate who writes very special and very precious things for gourmet magazines and the like. He's a bachelor and a recluse with few friends, only devotees and adherents to the cause of tart sophistry. He has no interest save whatever current annoyances he can put his mind to. He has no purpose to his life except the formulation of day-to-day opportunities to vent wrath on mechanical contrivances of an age he abhors. Bartlett Finchley is a malcontent, born either too late or too early in the century, and who, in just a moment, will enter a realm where muscles and the will to fight back are not limited to human beings. Next, Finchley, the Twilight Zone. So, Scott, let's get your first impression of A Thing About Machines.
First off, I love the fact that they're trying to incorporate Rod into like the episode itself. Sooner or later, they're just going to give up, and he's just going to stand there in front of the screen. But
Yeah.
like he showed up as a figment of the writer's imagination in the last episode of last season.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's in the TV. They'll do that gimmick a couple times here before they finally just say screw
he
it.
has a really great entrance coming up in Eye of the Beholder, where you see his shadow before you see him.
Yeah, absolutely. So my first impression is every time I see this episode, I cannot get past Finchley's hoity-toity voice every single time. The pencil mustache, he strikes me as that guy that you're walking down the street and you just want to walk up and punch him in the face. Doesn't matter who he is. He could be feeding the homeless. But when he sounds and looks like that, you just want to punch him in the face. It's the American way. That's my first impression.
Well, I was interested in this because Richard Hayden, the actor who plays Bartlett, his biggest claim to fame is Uncle Max and The Sound of Music. But Disney fans, he's the voice of Caterpillar in Alice in Wonderland. He's very good at playing those hoity-toity, you want to punch them characters.
Yeah. Most of the people in Alice in Wonderland I want to punch, but that's the Tim Burton version.
Oh yeah, that's very true. But no, this was an episode I had not seen, and I was interested to see where it was going, and I didn't. I would be getting an episode where he would be chased down the stairs by an electric razor, but
hey, it looked better. It looked better than the slot machine from The Fever. At least this one had a little bit of special effects. It wasn't on a dolly being pushed into the room.
That was my thing. I said, this is not nearly. It's laughable, but it's not nearly as laughable as The Fever. This actually looks plausible here. So
I think that's going to be the entire discussion here for this episode. It could have been worse. It wasn't nearly good, but it could have been so much worse.
But it's interesting. It's something new that we haven't seen, and it's taken modern of the era and how technology was taking over. If only we had Rod around today to really technology today. But it's interesting. It's very much of its time, and it has a very, very interesting individual actor that you really couldn't cast in other types of roles. So we'll have a little more fun talking about that. But Scott, we'll start first with the positive. What are the things that work for you in this episode?
Some of the special effects, honestly, and I just made fun of the shaver, but I do like the fact that they did try to do some things there, especially with the machines kind of dealing with coming to life on him. The typewriter talking to him over and over again. Excuse me. I keep thinking that you're going to see Red Drum show up on those pieces of paper, but I guess you're going to have to deal with Get Out Finchley instead. I truly love his secretary. Edith Rogers is the character played by Barbara Stewart. As much as I have complained about some women in Twilight Zone and obviously in 60s television in general, not being, the most forceful characters or standing up for themselves, Rogers from the get-go doesn't take any of Finchley's crap. She immediately quits when he goes, crazy again. And even when she's trying to be nice, trying to care for this guy who obviously is not firing on all cylinders, even though his car will be in a little bit, she just doesn't take it. And after a while, she's just like, I'm done, I'm out. And I just appreciate having a character who isn't driven by the plot and isn't going to be forced around by the male character in the show. And I think we're sorely lacking that kind of character sometimes in these episodes, so I liked seeing that.
Yeah, I really appreciated, as you mentioned before, the special effects and it was really done well. And actually, the car chase, I really enjoyed, because it had a certain mood to it that I really liked. And I do think that for the time, I think for the time, the special effects are done well for a 1960 budget, and I think they really lend themselves well to the theme of this episode. Richard Hayden, as I mentioned before, he's an actor that you could only cast very, very specifically in very kinds of roles, but he does his job in this episode, and he does what he's supposed to do. And I think that he really lends a great deal to this episode as well. You mentioned the secretary also. I think that she's one of the better supporting female characters we've seen in a while. She's very independent and very intelligent, and she's not this sort of nagging, shrew of a woman that we've seen so much in the last few episodes of the last season. But it's and I like the set in this episode. I like the mansion set, and I like the outdoor work. It's got a very good look to it. So it's a very creative episode, but it doesn't quite gel the way I think that other Twilight Zone episodes do. But we'll get into that also. So Scott, what doesn't work for you about this episode?
Well, rewinding real quick, a couple of things. I have to wonder, did Stephen King see this episode when he was writing Christine?
Because that's what I thought.
I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand, and I'm sure this is not the only two references to killer cars. I mean, well, obviously we have Maximum Overdrive, another Stephen King property, but I just, whenever I watch the car go after Finchley, I just think that is a Stephen King, just story right there.
Oh yeah.
And along with that too, another thing we didn't mention is I also like the TV repair guy. I just like the way he is so.
Oh yeah.
He's so condescending. He reminds me of all the guys, including myself, who used to work at Best Buy and do tech support on computers. We're all told that the customer's always right, but sometimes the customer's also an asshole. And so you're going to have to deal with that too. And I love that he's like, well, Mr. Finchley, there's so many wires pulled back here. I mean, obviously, well, I don't know what happened. Okay, sure. Okay, I'm going to charge you double because you're a jerk, and I'm just going to leave now. So I do like him quite a bit too.
The insult that he gives him. What does he say? That he's the most unmemorable person he's ever met, or something.
And it is nice to see those old TVs. I used to, with my family, and I'm sure all families of people who were in their late 20s, early 30s, and beyond, had the big old piece of furniture that happened to have a TV set in it that got maybe 10 channels, and you had to get up and turn the dial every time you wanted to change a channel. You kids and your remote controls and your Netflix, you have no idea what it was like back in the 80s, or I guess in the 60s for that matter. Okay.
We had one of those old TVs in my parents' bedroom, and yeah, you had to get up and actually change the channel. So
then later on, we would watch squiggly lines, hoping that the pay channels would come through for a few seconds. But that's a story for another night. Okay. You did it too. Everyone did it.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll get HBO for a moment. I don't know. And maybe I'll get a maraca dancer telling me to get the hell out of the house. So things I didn't like. I'm sorry, I completely derailed that conversation as per usual.
That's okay.
Things I didn't like. As I already said, I don't like Finchley. I understand I'm not supposed to like Finchley,
Yeah.
but I'm also not supposed to like nails on a chalkboard. It doesn't mean I want to still listen to them for half an hour. And along with that, I just think the story itself was a little weak. And maybe it's one of those where it sounded like a good idea in the writer's room, like, hey, what if a guy's machines start attacking him and telling him to get out? But we never understand why. I know this sounds odd, but I want to have the machine's perspective. I want to know what they're doing. I want to know why they're telling this guy to get out. You know, they telling him to get out because he's beating up the TV and he's a bully. I don't know. I mean, do they know something about his backstory that they feel that he needs to be taken out? That actually will be a Twilight Zone episode down the road where another vehicle will go after a guy, and he goes after the guy, the car does, because the guy has done something. I'll leave that for when that episode shows up, 5 years from now in our review. So they do this story better in other Twilight Zone episodes. So I just wish they would have given us a little bit more. I think if we had a little bit less of Finchley running around like an idiot pulling cables out of walls, we could have got a little bit more story.
Yeah, I feel like this episode works better. It would work better actually as a 15-minute sketch than a half-hour episode. I feel like the point gets across well before the episode ends. And, he could have, we didn't need the whole razor attack, the whole middle act of it. I mean, the special effects work and everything, but we could have gone straight to the car part after the first 10 minutes of the episode. But you're right. I mentioned before though, I thought Richard Hayden was a good fit for the character. I mean, that doesn't mean he's a likable character, but yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I understand what they're trying to comment on. But it's, as I mentioned before, it's an episode very much of its time. It's not timeless in the way that the best Twilight Zone episodes are. This is not one of the episodes that's going to be studied in writing classes or directing classes or anything like that. Another thing that I thought was interesting, there's no really the best episodes of the Twilight Zone leave you with something to take away or some kind of feeling. And even though this guy, has kind of a brutal ending to him and it's kind of a very provocative ending, I didn't really leave this episode feeling anything. So that's also something that works against the episode.
And I wonder what they're trying to get at with him staying at the bottom of the pool. I mean, unless you're holding weights, that doesn't happen. So I mean, does it mean he was so scared that he decided to drown rather than going up to the car? I think that's what they were going for. But your body's still gonna float. So I don't get that. And by the way, I'm not crazy. The episode I mentioned is You Drive. It is episode 134. So we will be talking about it September 6th of 2019. It's a good episode.
Oh my gosh.
Season 5. Good episode.
Less than 2 years, so we'll take it.
Yep, episode 134. I just looked it up.
Oh, man. Another thing I was thinking about when I watched this episode was I thought this is maybe a precursor to Christine and the Brave Little Toaster.
Hey, that is one of Craig's favorite movies. I want to point that out. That boy watched Brave Little Toaster religiously. Religiously.
Oh man, well that's another podcast for another time. But
it's the Disney movie that wasn't Disney.
True. Another thing I want to ask you is that this season, because I think Craig gave it to you toward the end of us recording last season, but you have this new Twilight Zone companion. Is there anything in there that was written specifically about this episode?
Fun story.
Yes.
So I was looking at the Twilight Zone companion.
Yeah.
Because I was realizing we don't have much to talk about here. So maybe Mr. Mark Scott Secree, who still will not return my emails, by the way, maybe Mark, I'm talking to you here because I know you listen. Maybe Mark can help us out. Maybe there's like a little tidbit. Nope, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to hold this up to the camera so that no one can see on the podcast, but every episode got a little picture from the TV show. It's got a little bit of like a bio of the show and who wrote it and who everything else. And usually you have Rod's intro, you have a synopsis, you have Rod's outro, and then you have a discussion about the episode.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the discussion about the episode. Just right there. That's it.
Man.
It is 4 lines of text in the book because there's not much here. What Mark has to say is, although the concept of a thing about machines is a clever one, and some of the efforts are fun, parentheses, who couldn't help but love the image of an electric shaver slithering down the flight of stairs, in parentheses, neither the writing, direction, nor performances are able to give the show any real vitality. That's it. Thanks, Mark. You're a big help.
I know. Too bad we couldn't get him on here to elaborate.
Mark, why do you not give me good stuff to talk about? Where's the elephant information that I had from the last episode or 2 episodes ago? Help me out here, buddy. Yeah, one day he'll return my email and he'll say, please stop mentioning my name on your show. Please. And I will say, I will do that as soon as you do our show. I promise if you do our show, I will shut up.
But you know what? He hits the nail right on the head. That's why this episode has no life to it. And that's the thing. It had elements. It had the cleverness. It had the interesting plot. It had a provocative ending, all that stuff. But it just it seemed just like a filler episode to me, and it shouldn't have been. That's what kind of is interesting when you watch it.
The other thing I'm noticing about season 2, and I'm getting this from Mark's book as well, because Mark's book actually goes in order of production number rather than airing, is unlike season 1, which for the most part aired in order of production, season 2 so far has bounced around a lot.
Wow.
We were talking about episode 4 of the season, but a thing about machines was actually produced after The Howling Man, Eye of the Beholder, and Nick of Time, the next 3 episodes. So,
which are all incredibly better episodes.
Yeah, so I almost feel like either the Rod or the studio, I'm going to guess Rod at this point, knew what he had in some episodes, and some episodes were a little weaker. So he decided to kind of shape up the order a little bit so you didn't have really weak episodes back to back. And I think that's why we're kind of seeing things like this. But that's just my assumption.
Yeah, I guess sort of eat up the product you have and get it out of the way. Don't, save the better product to be, used in the middle of the season or whatever. But I think we pretty much covered what we wanted to with this episode. Any final thoughts on a thing about machines, Scott?
Again, I don't hate this episode. It's a decent episode. I'm more disappointed because I think the idea, especially, now it's kind of hokey because it's the 21st century and we have phones the size of our palms that do everything that was in that room and then so much more. But even Rod says in his intro that this is a man who was born a little too late or maybe a little too early. And I think in the 60s, especially early 60s, it would have been much more interesting to see a conversation about how technology is scary and changing the world around these people, because it is.
Yeah.
And I think that would have been a better conversation. And I think it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of what there really isn't. I don't feel like what was going on in the culture is really grasped at the end of this episode, and I think that's what is missing. There's no cultural relevance that Serling usually likes to put in it, which is why it doesn't nearly stand out as well. But anyway, we'll get to our rankings here, though, of this episode. If you're just joining us for this episode, we will let you know that every week we rank the episode on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the very best the Twilight Zone has to offer, and 1 being the fever, the chaser, or as Scott likes to put it, bewitching pool. I have not seen Bewitched and Bull with my own eyes yet, and won't for another 2.5 years. But
It's coming.
we'll,
Much
we'll
much like the kid's pie. It's coming.
but I'll take the word for it now that it's a one. But Scott, let's figure out though, where would you put A Thing About Machines on the scale?
I'm gonna say this is a 5. This is an average Twilight Zone episode. I don't feel like it's bad enough for me to go below average. It's just there. It's not bad. It's not good. There's some positives. Again, I really like Mrs. Rogers or Miss Rogers. I like the TV repairman. I like the concept. I like where they were trying to go. It's just bogged down by mediocrity, and so it gets a mediocre score.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I'm placing it exactly where you did. I knew right where I was going to put this when we came in, and nothing changed my mind. So it is a 5. It is an average episode. There's nothing terrible about it, but there's nothing that stands out about it. So it's an average Twilight Zone episode. So if you compared it to other TV shows, average episodes, it probably stands out a little taller though, because usually the worst of the Twilight Zone sometimes is better than the average episodes of a regular TV show. But yeah, I think that's exactly a fair place to put it.
And I would go a little farther, even to say, if I had to like decide if it's like a low 5 or a high 5, it's definitely closer to a 4.5 than a 5.5. So it is below average, but just there on the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And before I get to Rod's closing narration for this episode, just to preview, next week we have, I think since The Hitchhiker, like the first genuinely at times like scary episode of The Twilight Zone coming up, which I'm excited to talk about. It's a very moody one, and so it's been a while since we've talked about sort of a creepy Twilight Zone episode, and I'm looking forward to talking about that. But let me read you Rod's final words here for Thing About Machines. Yes, it could just be. It could just be that Mr. Bartlett Finchley succumbed from a heart attack and a set of delusions. It could just be that he was tormented by an imagination as sharp as his wit and as pointed as his dislikes. But as perceived by those attending, this is one explanation that has left the premises with the deceased. Look for it filed under M for machines in the Twilight Zone.
Filed under M for mediocre.
So Scott, tell people where they can find us.
You can find us at thefrontrowmoviereviews.com. There you'll be able to find all the episodes for this show, plus Brandon's classics, and I'm looking forward to our next classic, Brandon. I think we're hitting one of my favorite films of all time, and I don't want to steal your thunder, so I'll let you talk about that when you're ready. But also, you can find our reviews of every episode of Star Trek Discovery, all 9 of them so far. You can find my flashbacks, which is 80s and 90s movies that we go over. We are, at the time of this release, we are a few days away from Thanksgiving. So, of course, we just talked about Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and that will be dropping here on Monday, I think, maybe Tuesday, one of those. And then you can find all the other episodes there, too. So, again, thefrontrowmoviereviews.com. You can also email us at thefrontrowmoviereviews@gmail.com. Mark, I'm looking at you. I've emailed you a couple times. Email me back. And you can always find more of our shows by subscribing either on your podcast app of choice, or if you're watching us on YouTube, hit subscribe there. And either way, please give us a review and a like. We really do appreciate. Make sure you comment and let us know what you think so we can continue to improve this. And this was a live episode, so if you are checking this out on YouTube, hit that little bell icon below the subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified whenever we go live with our shows.
And with that, for A Thing About Machines, and we'll see you next week for The Howling Man. I am Brandon Davis.
And I am Scott, pencil mustache, McFarland. And I hate that voice.
And we will see you on the couch.
Goodbye. You are a mediocre man in a mediocre episode. Goodbye.